Our scripture reading tonight is taken from Psalm 139, verses 1 to 12. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and night wraps itself around me, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. The word of the Lord.
I've been puzzling my way through these winter months, and this is the one I've been working on lately. Nature and books belong to the eyes that see them. It's really very cute. I finished that one a couple of days ago, and now I'm doing a 2,000 piece. My house can barely handle a table big enough for a 2,000 piece puzzle, so this is a new challenge. It is so satisfying to put those pieces in their places and end up with something beautiful, maybe even interesting. It's comforting to me in the long, dark evenings when I actually don't have a lot of energy for much else these days. And I've been puzzling in another way too, puzzling over a question. Why is life so hard? It is such an annoying, whiny question, especially coming from a middle-class, white, reasonably healthy Canadian. I've got a great family and lots of friends and meaningful job and a cute little house in a lovely neighborhood. I'm not running from war with a child in my arms. But a wise person once told me it's not really that helpful to compare suffering. Suffering is suffering, and I do feel like I'm suffering a little bit right now, and life feels just a little too dark. I turned 50 this past year, as did a few of my friends, and I discovered there's a lot of 50 and fabulous paraphernalia out there. It is flattering, but it does not or did not ring true for me when I turned 50, nor does it right now. 50 and fatigued, 50 and faltering, 50 and fragile, 50 and fed up is more like it. I'm trying to be appropriate with those F words. It turns out there are no cute GIFs for the fatigued and the faltering and the what was my third word? I was ad-libbing there. And the fed up 50-year-olds. So here's tonight, what is God doing in my life, and what has God been teaching me lately? These are the questions that all our teachers in this series have been asked to respond to, and it is a very difficult assignment. I'd rather take a particular text and study it and listen for its meaning and then share it with you. But these wide open questions are frightening. I'm not sure whose idea this was. Not to mention, you already know what God is doing in my life and what God is teaching me because it comes out in all of my teaching times as your pastor, so what more is there to share? Well, our collective vision for this faith community includes our willingness to be vulnerable, to be real, to trust each other with our stories. How else can we share each other's burdens and accompany each other along the way? How else can we live an authentic life of faith? So what I'm sharing with you tonight is that life for me has felt a little too dark for a little too long. And this teaching time, by the way, will be more reflection and less exegesis, and we're going to get to tonight's psalm near the end. What I'm learning about life in the dark is not going to surprise you. What I'm learning is that God is still with me. And it's what we talk about, especially during Advent and Christmas. God with us, Emmanuel. It's relatively easy to accept this truth when surrounded by evergreens and twinkling lights and the smell of cider on the stove. But when it's February in Winnipeg, we're in an extreme cold snap, and the Christmas lights that are still on in my neighborhood, I just roll my eyes. I'm sorry if I'm offending any of you in my neighborhood, but it is a bit much in the middle of February. Where is God, actually? Our faith in God with us is tested in the dark, in our ordinary disappointments, and in the days and weeks and maybe even months of feeling down, feeling not quite our hopeful selves. It's been a bit of a surprise to me that life can feel so hard, that I can feel so down and so weak, and that what happens to others I've coached and I've comforted, can happen to me. I thought I was strong, I thought I was impervious, and I guess I was arrogant. It doesn't help that I'm a pastor. Don't get me wrong, I've said this so many times. This is my dream job, it's my dream community. I'm as smitten with FaithWorks today as I was at the beginning of my time with you, which in November will be 10 years. So whenever my role ends, I hope to stay part of you, like former pastors Roger and Mary are, because you're my people, and there's no community I'd rather be part of. And as far as expectations of pastors go, you are pretty chill. You're okay with me being real, and I know you don't expect me to carry it all or to be perfect. That said, those of us who've grown up in the church, and even those who haven't, tend to have high expectations of our leaders. Leaders need to be our models, strong, put together. We know the stories of leaders who have fallen from grace for good reason. And we know the stories of leaders who somehow retain their positions while abusing their power. And it's fair to hold leaders to a higher standard, to a professional code of conduct. It's important for leaders to use their place of influence wisely, with humility, always respecting and caring for those they serve. But do leaders always need to be strong? Theologian Marva Dawn wrote a book called Powers, Weakness, and the Tabernacling of God, in which she says the church is called to reject power, full stop. Not work with power, reject it. The church is instead called to live out of weakness, because that is where God lives. She offers a theology of weakness, reminding us that at the center of our faith is a suffering Messiah who gave up power in the public square and on the cruel cross. Marva Dawn also points to Paul's letter to the Corinthians, and that's the passage Roger Thiessen reflected on in his teaching time a few weeks ago. When Paul was struggling, he heard God say, "My grace is sufficient for you. It's enough. For power is made perfect in weakness." And then Paul responded, "So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me." When we accept and come to peace with our weakness, we make room for God's power to live in us. Shortly before his death, Jesus said to his disciples, "Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." The invitation is to stop relying on our own strength, to rely on God's grace instead, to live in God and have God live in us. It's an invitation to trust. I was recently at a presentation hosted by River East Church and CMU, where guest speaker Meredith Miller talked about the ideas in her recent book. And the book is called Woven, Nurturing a Faith Your Kid Doesn't Have to Heal From. a provocative title. She had us make a list of all the things we've been taught that make us good Christians. And there was some relief in the room that the list we grew up with has changed over time. And it was apparent, at least from where I was sitting, that many of us had grown up in conservative Christian households, but we were now more progressive, which meant a lot more freedom in how we defined a good Christian. Well, phew. But then Miller surprised us, or at least surprised me, because she said, progressives just exchange one list for another. Instead of don't drink and smoke, it's don't shop at Walmart. Instead of memorize the Bible or memorize Bible verses, it's get involved in social justice issues or causes. Faith is still reduced to a list of good behaviors. And Miller said it's obedience training, it's moralism, it's bingo card faith. Fill up the card and you win. Miller suggested that when the life of faith looks like a bingo card of good behavior, whether you find yourselves on the progressive end of the spectrum or the conservative end, you end up exhausted. I end up exhausted. And start to wonder what kind of God would have us work this hard. What kind of God would have us work this hard? We start to think God owes us happiness for being so good. And then when we're desperately unhappy and disillusioned, we're also mad at God for breaking God's end of the contract. We did our part. Why do we feel so awful? And why is life still so hard? So a better paradigm, Miller proposed, is a trust-based faith. We simply get to know God over time and discover for ourselves if God can be trusted. And this is a faith that depends on God's character rather than our character. And it's resilient when the days get dark. I'm going to read that again. Think about it for yourself, and if you have children, for your children. A better paradigm, Miller proposes, is a trust-based faith, where we simply get to know God over time and discover for ourselves if God can be trusted. This is a faith that depends on God's character rather than our character, and it's resilient when the days get dark. So if central to God's character is love, and we trust in that, we'll be free. So much of the heaviness of life, so much of the intensity, is from the expectations we place on ourselves and on others. We try so hard. The other night, my husband John and I were at IHOP for an after-church breakfast. If you're used to Sunday morning church, you're like, what? After church? So, like, after this church? After-church breakfast. And we eat breakfast all day long, so it's the best. Well, we were about to pay for the bill, and the server asked if we wanted to make a donation to a charity. And I forget which charity, because I was so annoyed. Maybe people who are not, like I say, 50 and fed up. People who are not part of faith communities and aren't constantly encouraged to be giving. Maybe they need little nudges from the servers at IHOP, I don't know. But I was so annoyed. I cannot care about one more thing. Leave me alone and let me eat my pancakes in peace. And we can't possibly care about everything. We're going to burn out if we try too hard. The religious leaders of Jesus' day were very demanding. Not to mention that the people lived under oppressive Roman rule. But with Jesus, things were different. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light." There will always be hard things in life, things that we would rather not have to deal with. But some of what we carry was never meant for us to pick up in the first place, and we can lay it down. I'm learning the life of faith isn't about trying, it's about trusting. Trusting that God is love and that the way of Jesus isn't heavy after all. So I've talked about my little free library. You're going to get so sick of these analogies, but it's my joy place. My family and I live on a corner lot with quite a bit of pedestrian traffic, and I have this little free library on the fence inherited from former owners, Mark and Susan Moore. And I'm out there daily tidying the library and restocking the shelves and taking in extra donations of books. My neighbors and their well-behaved dogs, and I swear those dogs are all well-behaved, which is a thing because I have a bit of a fear of dogs. But the dogs are amazing. So they come and stop and they talk with me, bark with me. No, they don't really bark. They just kind of, anyway. My neighbors and their well-behaved dogs regularly stop to chat with me, to thank me for the library, and to occasionally recommend authors. Not that they insist I should put in the library, but that they insist I should read for my well-being. So there's a difference. And then they're on their merry way. And the only critique I've received was from an enthusiastic neighbor who thought this is last spring, who thought I should be filling the little mud puddle that was forming under the library with quarter down. And I barely knew what quarter down was. So I smiled and I nodded, and I didn't think much of it and didn't do anything about it. And a couple of days later, he did it. Right on. My neighbors need nothing from me but a decent book that isn't sticky and isn't falling apart. And I can handle that. So when Jesus says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," I think of the work of running my little free library, where it takes some effort, but it's manageable, and it leaves me lighthearted. And I wonder if life could be a bit more like that, if faith could be a bit more like that. What could we let go of? What burdens could we lay down? In what ways could we stop trying and start trusting? And if trust doesn't come easy, what's the barrier? Have we lost sight of God's character? Have we forgotten God is love? In the 14th century, after the Black Death, the bubonic plague pandemic that swept through Europe and killed around half the population in her city of Norwich, English mystic Julian of Norwich had her own near-death experience at the age of 30. She got very, very sick, and everyone thought she would die. She eventually recovered, but while she was ill, she had a series of visions of Jesus and experienced a powerful sense of God's goodness and God's love. And she later wrote them down, and they're now published under the title Revelations of Divine Love. And I think Susan has this book out in the little library table. You could take it home tonight. In one of her visions, Jesus comforted Julian of Norwich with these words. I'm sure you've heard them before. "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well." When you hear those words and things are not well, they are a great comfort. All shall be well. It doesn't mean your situation will get better. You might still get sick and die. But Julian of Norwich felt the presence of God and felt the love of God and heard these words. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Was Julian of Norwich able to receive these words and believe them and integrate them into her life because of her experience of God's love? I don't think we can trust without love. Who do you trust that you don't experience their love? You have to experience their love in order to trust them. Which brings us to our psalm for tonight, and listen for the love. Feel free to close your eyes or follow along on the screen. Psalm 139, 1-12. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. And even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high I cannot attain it. So where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, which is a Hebrew reference to the grave or the pit, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, your right hand shall hold me fast. And if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and night wrap itself around me, even the darkness is not dark to you, even the darkness. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. And so it might be tempting to interpret this psalm as a threat or something fearful. God will search you. Even the dark won't hide you. But that's a distortion. That's just us forgetting that God is love. I want love to search me, to know me, to hem me in, to hold me. I want to be found, especially when I'm in the dark. Being hemmed in, behind and before, reminds me of a loving mother carefully swaddling her baby. If God is love, we are safe in her arms. When I was a child, I had night terrors. They were different from bad dreams. They were worse, and they were weird. They were repetitive, and they were surreal. And the scariest ones had me doing something mundane over and over again, like writing my name backwards. It sounds so silly, but it was absolutely terrifying. And eventually I outgrew them, but while they were happening, I'm so glad my parents were close by. They, of course, weren't able to stop the night terrors, but they could be with me while they were happening, and when they were over, they could comfort me. My night terrors didn't scare my parents, at least as far as my childhood self could tell. My parents always responded with calm and gentleness, exactly what I needed. God is calm gentleness, with us in the dark, without judgment, without impatience, just loving presence. And so to close, I would like to share a favorite song with you. Joe and Brian will lead us soon in it. It's one I came upon shortly after turning 50 and not feeling fabulous. The song is called Night Vision, and it's by a group called Faithful, and it gave me the words to pray. Be my light, be my night vision. It's been so dark where I've been living. Don't let me fall apart. And then the first time I heard it, the chorus caught my breath and sent shivers down my spine. The day is yours, but the night is too. But the night is too. O creator of the darkness, the dark is light to you. So when it's a little too dark for you, let this be your prayer.